Welcome, welcome. As folks are joining, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, your organization, and then one word to describe your 2025. We'll go ahead and kick off with our agenda just to give an overview of what to expect this morning. Again, thanks for joining. I'm Madeline Green. I'm Policy Manager at Education Systems Center. Just as a heads up, we'll be recording this session to share online to folks who aren't able to join live. So you'll see that we're recording. Let me just get that. Oh, there we go. It is recording. Cool. We will first launch into just an overview of what you all responded in an exit survey from our September convening for the policy committee of what you'd be most interested in hearing about in our upcoming sessions. Then we will be joined by Stand for Children Illinois to present on some findings from a focus group study that they did this past summer and fall on chronic absenteeism in the state of Illinois. And then we will pivot to a look kind of at the data statewide from Advance Illinois in their The State We're In report. And then we'll just close up with some quick hits of state and federal policy updates, things kind of coming down the pike, and then close out with upcoming events and resources that you can look forward to in the end of 2025 and into the new year. So first off, just reflecting back what you all shared as top of mind topics for you in education in the state of Illinois from our September meeting. Folks, majority of folks selected, it was, select more than one. So we had a lot of overlapping interests, but all interconnected, of course, as well. But top of mind, top topics that folks were interested in hearing more about were changes to CTE clusters. So we'll touch on that a little later in the call. Some Illinois report card data. We'll get some quick hits from Emily there as well. Of course, federal policy shakeups and impact on college and career readiness specifically, and showcasing local innovative models in college and career readiness. We're aiming to showcase some innovative models in the new year with our next quarterly meeting. And then other relevant topics that folks had on their minds, of course, chronic absenteeism. So we'll hear from Stand Illinois in just a few minutes here around some of the findings they've had on that topic. High school graduation requirements, that's something else that we're kind of exploring and thinking about, and we'll keep kind of top of mind as we move forward in our policy committee sessions. And then finally, in line with the federal updates for this group, maybe top of mind are the workforce Pell rollout that's expected next year and how kind of states are adapting to that. We'll share some top line thinking and just showcase an upcoming event where you can learn more from an event that Advance Illinois is putting on next week from a national expert following developments in workforce Pell. So to kick us off, we have Jessica Handy, Executive Director of Stand for Children Illinois, and she'll be sharing some findings that Stand compiled this summer and fall, and the topic of chronic absenteeism in the state of Illinois. So Jessica, I'll pass it off to you, and thanks for joining us, and just let me know when you need the slides advanced.
All right. Thanks for having me, Madeline. Thanks for the invitation. So go ahead and advance the slide. So I thought I would just really quickly run through what the new report card showed about chronic absenteeism. This is really not going to be, surprising to anyone on this call. It's highest in like kindergarten and then in high school. So we've also, go ahead and do the next slide. You can also see just trends from kindergarten and first grade where it's kind of highest in elementary school, that we're making some progress in bringing that down year over year. And then you can see in the high school grades where we are sort of making some progress, but it's a lot more stubborn. It's harder to bring those, it's been harder to make a dent in those grades. So, next slide, please. So there are a couple of other, things that I want to give like contextually before I jump into this. One is that the Overdeck Foundation funded 5 pilot sites, including one in CPS that the Consortium for Chicago School Research is studying. And the initial findings, that's all I've been able to find. I don't think this is finished yet, but the initial findings are that post-pandemic absenteeism varies widely between schools with similar pre-pandemic attendance rates. So basically what this is telling us is that there are a lot of predictors of attendance other than neighborhood poverty or family education levels. So there are things that schools are doing that are improving chronic absenteeism. It is not, as we sometimes hear, it is not entirely the fault of families. It is not the fault of parents. I mean, obviously there are lots of factors that go into things, but there are things that schools can do that really can make a difference in attendance rates. Next slide. And then I was kind of disappointed that Illinois was not one of these 16 states, but there is a challenge going on right now where 16 states have opted in. Attendance Works is partnering with those states, and they have committed to cutting their rates of chronic absenteeism in half over 5 years. So that is another thing that we are watching, but not participating in. Slide. And then a quick note about the chronic absenteeism indicator. This was in the Vision 2030 plan. There was, there were things in there that sort of hinted that they'd like to move away from chronic absenteeism as a main indicator for our ESSA accountability system. But you could see, probably folks on this call have seen the draft that is out right now where chronic absenteeism, or at least it's inverse. They're calling it consistent attendance. So the percentage of kids that are not chronically absent does remain in there, and we want to see that continue. I think that was a bit of good news. And one of the things that we're thinking about is growth in attendance instead of just like, do you have attendance of X amount, that maybe there could be some sort of if you grow your attendance, your consistent attendance rate, that could also work instead of meeting a proficiency standard. But ISB just announced yesterday that they are going to come out with a revised plan and extend the timeline on this. So that is good news in our opinion, and I think we'll be keeping an eye on this. Okay. All right, so moving on to the focus group methodology, we put out a call to parents and students of high schoolers who were chronically absent. So we got 15 takers. We did 4 different groups. These were virtual. About half of the participants were Chicago parents. And they attended a variety of schools, traditional schools, charter schools, a couple of alternative schools. 5 were suburban, 3 were downstate. And we gave participants a $50 gift card for their active participation in the 90-minute focus group. This is maybe TMI, but kind of interesting, have had an influx, and apparently lots of people have too, that one of the challenges with doing focus groups is you get a lot of people from out of country that want the $50 gift card. And so you have to like find a way to screen out those people and make sure that you're hearing from actually people who are impacted by this. And so we shifted things around and said you have to have a physical address in Illinois to receive your gift card. We're not mailing those electronically. And so we weeded out about half of the people that had RSVP'd by doing that. And we will always do that from now on as a way, it's like a quality control measure. So obviously focus groups are not a representative sample. It's not a scientifically validated survey. So oh, I copied and pasted this from a report, but I think Emily put a link to it, to our blog post, where if you want to actually see our script, you can take a look at it. Um, and then our last focus group was held on September 11th. We held these in August and September. So there was, it was right after that ICE presence in Chicago really ramped up. And I know that anecdotally we're hearing that attendance is down in places where people have a lot of concerns about immigration enforcement. But we actually did not hear anything about that in our focus groups, which I think is a real limitation of what the information we were able to gather from those. Okay, so given our limitations, the focus group findings were, I think probably the thing that surprised me the most was how mostly positive the parents felt, like that they were in a team with their kids' school. They knew this was a problem. They, fought about this a lot at home. They really were trying to support their kids to get to school. This was not parents who didn't care or didn't think it was a big deal. These were not, for the most part. So some of them had a lot of critique about their kids' school, but a lot of them felt like the school was their partner in this. One parent, and this was a parent who who ended up pulling her kid out of the school and sending him to an alternative school. But she basically said it just wasn't working for him. Nobody's dropping the ball. They've got these measures in place. It's up to the individual to take advantage of them. It just didn't work for her kid, but she wasn't blaming the school. So that was kind of nice to see that people thought of themselves as a team. Slide. But then, the positivity was not universal. So we heard one mom, sharing stories about her son. Her son had autism. There was a lot of bullying from kids and adults at school. She just didn't feel like he was safe at school. Most did have adults in the building that they had positive relationships with. There was one student who could not identify one adult in the building they had a positive relationship with. That was very sad. Um, a lot were concerned about just the safety of the school environment. And then we did hear several parents and students talk about being threatened with legal action for their kids' attendance, which none of them believed that was helpful to a situation where they were already frustrated and already trying their best to get their children to go to class. I think we had some conversations with regional superintendents who had gone and gotten information from their state's attorneys as well about like how many of these truancy cases were brought. And a lot of them sort of said the opposite. They felt like they didn't have any tools in the toolbox and didn't have support in that way. So I'm certainly not saying that like these parents were right, that this is, wrong, but this was the perception that we heard, was that, it does not make us feel like we're supported in getting our kids to school when you're threatening us with legal action. All right, so not surprisingly, a lot of the things we heard about were really complex issues that will require a much larger effort outside of the education system, things that are not within the school's purview to control. The school cannot unilaterally, end poverty in Illinois, but we did hear a lot about that: poverty, childcare availability, food insecurity, neighborhood violence, lack of resources and support for families in the community. There's a loss of the sense of community. So I think it's safe to say those are serious issues that we cannot probably solve at the individual school level. And so I wanted to, flag there definitely are bigger picture things here. But moving on now, there are things that we learned that we think are actionable and really reasonable recommendations. And so I'm going to get to those now. And the first, this is going to be no surprise to anybody: ensure every student has a positive adult relationship in the building. So one parent said a lot of the things that you'd see in the attendance works protocol, like, call, like the real time calls home, in-home visits, like proactive conversations with families, having someone they can talk to as like a point person for families. Someone also recommended, get together with parents who have struggled and sort of gotten it back together and find out, what's worked for them, what's been effective in this local context. Um, for others, it was more like, I know my kid's not in school. I mean, some don't. Some would say they drop their kid off and their kid would walk out the back door and not even go into the school after they drop their kid off. But for others, it was like, I know my kid's at home. I know I can't get my kid there today. My kid needs to feel some sort of intrinsic motivation to make it there. My kid needs to know that they belong, that they're part of their school community, that there are adults who care about them and would miss them and would notice them if they're not there for a day. Next slide. All right, this one I think is probably the most actionable of all of the things. It's easy, it's free. Don't overpenalize tardiness. This came up in every group that we had, that if a kid came to school late, it was often punished more than if they don't show up at all. So, one participant said they called it the tardy tank, like the drunk tank, like jail. Like you come to school, late and you can't go to class. You have to just like go in this holding tank until the next class period. So it's obvious that you're late. And some talked about trying to like time when they would show up to be in between a passing period so that they could get in. And then the worst example we heard was two parents who said that they get a monetary fine if their kid's late. One gets a $25 fine if their kid is 15 minutes late, and one gets charged $1 per minute if their kid is late. And that is actually illegal already. It is illegal to charge a fine or fee for disciplinary purpose. So I think this counts, and this would be an illegal practice. So we we are actually trying to kind of track down who's doing that, and maybe take that up directly with those schools. Um, but a lot of them, it's like you get an in-house detention if you show up late 3 times. If you just don't show up, then it doesn't count against you. So just don't make it worse to be late than to show up. And not that we want kids to be late either. Like that's not something to aspire to, but some school is better than no school. So this is one that I really hope people hear and do something about. Okay. Next. Dress code barriers. We did hear a lot about this. It's just a source of conflict. Parent couldn't make it to the laundromat last week, and so their kid had an incomplete uniform and got sent home, or it had a hole in their jeans and got sent home. So some sort of just like shared closet at the school. If a kid's gonna miss school because they don't have the right shirt, maybe you just give them a shirt instead of sending them home. Hairstyles that require lots of work, lots of hours of braids, lots of sometimes you don't finish that like in between a school day. So allowing some sort of like hat or scarf or something. We had one student got kicked out because she was wearing a scarf, and because her hair was not done. And it was like, that seems like reasonable, that, let's find a way that a kid can go to school even when they're sort of mid hairstyle. Next slide. And then this somewhat belongs in that first category of things that are bigger than the school in terms of like anxiety, which was a big theme. My kid was anxious and didn't want to go to school because they were just the anxiety, the peer conflicts. It was, but one of the things that surprised me because we are actually working on cell phone stuff in an, another bucket of our work was just take away the phones during school to minimize that sort of anxiety and social media peer conflict. A lot of this is going on the phone in school, and adults in the building don't know it's happening. When it's happening on a phone, they can't, see that the conflict's happening. So limiting phone use on campus, we think could be helpful for minimizing the anxiety that a kid feels while they're there in the school building. Um, Slide. And then alternative options. Yeah, like the parent I quoted earlier who just had nothing but good things to say about the school her kid had come from, but it just didn't work for her kid. And he found an alternative school and it was a good fit. And he graduated from there and he went on to college. And there was another parent who had a similar story. It wasn't like the school was bad or doing anything wrong. It just wasn't the right fit. And then we heard not just alternative schools, but alternative programs. A kid who um, a kid who just could not get motivated to go until she entered the CNA pathway and was so motivated that it turned her attendance around and she started going. That was a kid this year. Like I think this was a September one. So she had just started and she was having a really good school year with really good attendance because she was finally in like a pathway program and finally could see a direct line between what she wanted to do with her life and why she was going to school. And then we did hear some extracurricular activities too, like just kids needed something to keep them motivated, something to keep them going, having some sort of extracurricular activities that motivated them to go was well. But this is the power of career and technical education was a theme that definitely came through in our focus groups. Next slide. Probably less easy to solve was busing. Just kids that are, feel like they're walking along dangerous routes. Parents having to drive, multiple kids, multiple directions, cuts in busing, bus driver shortages. I think this is definitely like a hard one to solve, but it is probably one of the main reasons why we as an organization are supported the shift from, instead of asking 550 million for EBF, that we wanted to also incorporate mandated categoricals into that ask, because we've heard so much about transportation challenges, both like as a way to get to CTE programs, but also just as a way to improve chronic absenteeism. Buses are not reliable. People don't feel like it's a reliable way to get their kid to school. And then finally, I don't know how easy of a thing this is to solve, but I did want to put this down because we had one participant who was a student who had an autoimmune disease, and he had chronic pain. And so a lot of days he would wake up and he just like couldn't move. He was in so much pain. And then the next and then he would go to school if he was feeling okay in the morning, but then needed to get an ibuprofen from school, and he said it was like trying to ask for heroin. He just couldn't get it. And so he would go home because he like couldn't get like an over-the-counter pain medicine. And I know this is like an intersection of other sort of regulatory environments here, but I did want to write this because it did sound like a very real barrier for him. And it sounds like something that we should have some common sense medication management, but I don't actually know how many other regulatory circles we would need to involve in order to accomplish that. But all right, that's it. I think those are our 7 recommendations from focus groups. And yeah, glad to take any questions if anyone has any.
I think we've got about 5 minutes for questions. Questions, comments, if folks want to come off mute or add them in the chat.
Really glad to see a lot of this because we are having extreme problems with chronic absenteeism. Um, Coming from a medical background, I do understand the medical access
Mhm.
because schools are being sued right and left for an ibuprofen. But there is quick, easy fixes for that. Parents can literally drop the medication off and leave it with the school nurse, and they can supply that student with a medication typically. So there is some quick go arounds to that, but I do understand that one because there has been incidents in the past where a student was given um, medication that was over the counter and allergic to it, and then the school.
Yeah,
So I get it.
yeah.
There's a
I don't
question.
have any data on pathway programs improving attendance or grades specifically. We do have data on pathway programs improving graduation rates. But I don't think I know about attendance specifically with like real data.
Uh, Aaron, that's a great question. And I think, something we at Ed Systems have been working on pursuing a number of times over the years in collaboration with our state agencies, including the State Board of Ed, as Ben is noting in the chat, is we're really interested in studying exactly this, right? Especially given the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act and college and career pathway endorsements in particular, like being able to assess the impact of that on a variety of student participation and outcomes. So Aaron would love to know more about what you're studying. So if you want to drop your email in the chat, or we would love to connect to learn more.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. We'd love to connect around that. Um, we have a few more minutes for questions or comments. I particularly enjoyed, Jessica, how you separated kind of those more complex systemic societal challenges from what may be more the low hanging fruit, free, accessible, just changes in practice on a local level. That's really helpful for me to kind of digest like how we tackle this massive problem that
Yeah.
obviously has deeper and complicated root causes.
Yeah, the tardiness and the dress code barriers, I felt like were two that we could really like pretty easily do something about right away without a lot of heavy lifting. Right. Well, thank you guys for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us this
Thanks,
morning.
Jessica, and thanks for the work.
All right.
You can check out their report in these slides. We'll share it out as well, linked in our follow-up email after today's call. But thank you again, Jessica, for sharing Stan's important work in addressing the crisis of chronic absenteeism. All right, so now we will pivot to a broader kind of aerial view of Illinois education data with an incredible annual comprehensive report that Advance Illinois releases, the state we're in. We're joined by Director of Policy, Kelsey Backen. So thank you, Kelsey, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks all. I'm going to talk very quickly today. We have a full report. It's the full B through 20. I'm going to skip over some of the early childhood stuff just to stay focused on the work that you all do, but it will be included in the presentation, so feel free to follow up if you have any comments there. So next slide. The state we're in is a biannual report that Advance Illinois puts out, where we look at a number of metrics along the B through 20 continuum. We've put it out every 2 years. I know some people who on this call are very keenly aware of those reports as they worked on them in prior lives. And so this report, and go to the next slide. We do not do it alone. Again, another reason why some folks on this call might be aware is we have a state we're an advisory group who offer technical expertise, practitioner perspectives, so that when we're building out this report, it is a robust and well-rounded report. So thank you for those who are on this call who delved into that. A little bit more about the report on the next slide. The state we're in, we look at approximately 80 metrics grouped by education sector, again, early childhood, K through 12, and post-secondary, and we focus along the continuum looking at enrollment and access, learning conditions, and outcomes. a critical part of this report is that we do look at national trends. We think it's really important to not only know what's happening in Illinois, but how are we ranking nationally and what does that mean for the state? And we always work to consider equity gaps and consider that disaggregated data when available. And in this report, that's different than other reports is in some instances we'll denote federal data sets that are a little bit wobbly right now, given the changes of the federal administration. So that's another important aspect of the report that we included this year. Next slide. So real quick, I'll do a very, very quick overview of the progress metrics to see how the state is doing on a number of metrics along the continuum. Next slide. For the K through 12 academic and progress, we take a look at Illinois' 4th and 8th grade proficiency. One important thing to note about 4th and 8th grade proficiency in the state is we did hold steadier than other states, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on. But it is important to note that fewer than a third of students are showing proficiency, and we see that both for 4th and 8th graders and then also for college and career readiness. And so if you look at the college and career readiness as measured by the ACT and the SAT, that's actually been on the decline since 2015. So this was a trend that we were seeing prior to the pandemic. We saw a drop from 38% to 30%. One bright spot for the state when we're thinking about progress metrics is our high school persistence and completion. We see 9th grade on track and graduation rates staying stably high. And we'll talk about that later as well, but some really significant equity gaps closing in those areas. Next slide. If we're looking at higher education enrollment and attainment, we are seeing a trend more recently that we've seen the percentage of students immediately enrolling in higher education falling. We saw that fall during the pandemic, and it has not quite rebounded. In the 2025 report card, that actually states about this stable at about 66%, again, falling from a high in 2022. Other bright spots, sorry, one back on the slide before, Madeline, sorry about that. Post-secondary completion is on the rise. We've seen that inching up from 49% to 56%. That's a really bright spot, as well as adults with post-secondary degrees. We saw that increase from 45 to 49%. And we'll talk a little bit more about that attainment metric at the end. One note on the ILDS, these are point in time metrics, so they can say, how are our sectors doing? So right now we can see how in post-secondary completion is doing and what that's telling us. We can see what our high school graduation and how our high schools are doing in supporting those. But what we can't tell you right now with this data is how are students moving from 9th grade to high school graduation to post-secondary into an employment, because we lack a fully functioning and accessible ILDS system that the state can use to track that information. We know that we have a lot of the data systems built out, but for everyday people, researchers to access it, it's not quite fully functioning in the way that we want it to right now. So look for that too. You can read that about in the report. You can see the report numbers there at the bottom. Next slide. So state rankings, again, we find it really important to highlight where the state is at, ranking up against other sectors. And so what we do see right now is that 2 out of 5 metrics are in the top half of states for early childhood, 10 out of 16 for K through 12, and 20 out of 28 for higher education. So in a number of ways, the state is doing really well, ranking in the top half of states. One area that we did see across all of our metrics that did have disaggregated data is that all but one had equity gaps. So all of our metrics that we looked at, and you can look at in our data tables, the full scope of those metrics, all but one had equity gaps for students of color, students from low-income backgrounds, and our English learners. So keep that in mind as we're working through the presentation. I'll skip over this slide. K-12. So if we're looking at learning conditions for K-12, we're seeing an interesting story where we're seeing state funding. So some of our learning conditions, what is the state spending? Our student-teacher ratio, students taking AP exams. We're all in the top half of states. Again, 18th for funding, 4th for student-to-teacher ratios in elementary. Students taking AP exams were 7th in the country. So really strong progress there. There's other areas, as Jessica was speaking to earlier, where we are having troubling performance. Most people across the country are struggling, but we're the 20th in the nation chronic absenteeism and a number of mental health indicators that we'll speak about soon. We're in the bottom half for 2 of 3 metrics. I'm going to actually skip over the outcomes because we'll come back to that later. I want us to have a little bit more time. Higher education, we're seeing a really interesting story here. If you look at our enrollment and access, we're kind of all over the place. We see state spending on higher education is nearly last in the country. We're 48th. Tuition and fees are some of the highest in the country. But our net tuition revenue, so what students actually pay, that's at about 20th right now. So our enrollment and access is all over the place. Our students are being priced out of our post-secondary institutions in the state. But what we see is through our learning conditions and our outcomes is that once students get to those post-secondary institutions, they're doing largely well. Community college retention is in the top 5 in the nation. Public university is more in the middle of the pack. But Illinois is consistently in the top half of states for measures of completion and attainment. So once we're getting our students there, they're largely successful, but it's getting them there that we're creating some barriers. Next slide. A little bit about the Illinois landscape. Along the way, we'll talk about enrollment, we'll talk about funding, and then we'll talk about some mental health trends. Thanks, Annalyn. So looking at enrollment, what we've seen is that the state population is decreasing, as well as children of school age. So birth rates are decreasing, children under 5, it's decreasing. And what we see is a proportional decrease in our K through 12 education, so about 10%. But what we're seeing an outsized decrease in is our higher education. So again, thinking back to why our students are being priced out, what's going on there, we saw a 28% decrease in higher education. Here on the left, what you can see is that not only is our K through 12 schools, they are decreasing proportionally, but our schools are becoming more diverse and our more districts are serving English learners than ever before. And you can see that those colors ranging across the state, and the concentration of English learners are increasing in a lot of districts, highlighting the need for additional services to make sure those students can thrive and, the changing demographics of the state. Thanks, Madeline. Next slide. When we talk about funding, we are, telling an interesting story where our state-funded preschool, I won't go into it too much. It's grew a little bit, but we're staying kind of in the middle of the pack for state funding for preschools. For public universities and community colleges, we are at the bottom. We are trailing the nation. Our higher education appropriations have actually dropped by 33% after inflation adjustments, and that's putting us at 48th in the country and what we're investing in our higher ed institutions. And we'll talk more about what's that showing up with for our institutions later. A different story is being told in our K through 12. Many of you are aware of the evidence-based funding formula passed in 2017, and we have seen significant increases in our ranking for K through 12 funding, with funding increasing by 75% between 2008 and 2024. So again, we were 47th. We've increased that to 18th in the country. And what that means for students in districts is that the percentage of students in districts with less than 70%, so less than 70% of what they need, that's dropped from 62% of students were in those districts to only 4% of those districts. We do know we have a big hill to climb. We're about $2.7 billion gap still currently, as well as a gap for mandated categoricals. But we're really proud of the work the state has done to invest in this funding formula. Next slide. I'm going to focus in on affordability for higher education. If you look at the two bar charts, the two figures on the right. So again, despite some more recent increases in higher education funding, those decades of disinvestment have resulted in overly high costs for students and families. And what that means for families is that for community colleges, it's relatively affordable. Again, the national average being about 4.9% and our median income family at about 5%. But that is at 14% of a family's income needed to pay for community colleges at the federal poverty line for our community colleges. And for our higher ed, for our 4-year universities, we are above that national average. We are asking our families of a median family income to pay about 18% of their income, and for a family at the federal poverty line, 50% of their income. Again, significantly barriers to a post-secondary institution. Next slide. This is a little bit of a hard pivot, but one we wanted to highlight early on is that we are seeing mental health trends worsening in the state. These trends were worsening prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely exacerbated them. We're seeing about 77% of Illinois youth have experienced an ACE, with higher rates for certain demographics, specifically Black students. In our K through 12 youth risk behavioral system, which is a survey students can complete, more students than ever are feeling sad or hopeless, as well as another number of other metrics. And we're seeing that same trend in higher education. So twice as many students felt that their mental health affected their academics compared to 2007. So some pretty significant mental health trends that the state and students are grappling with. Next slide. We'll skip over these ones. If you're interested in learning about early childhood, definitely let me know. Happy to talk through those. So digging into the K through 12 education a little bit more, we'll start by highlighting one enrollment trend that's on the next slide that's a little bit hard to parse out. We talked about the enrollment trends, again, dropping about 10% for K through 12 schools. What we also found in this analysis was that a growing number of students are neither enrolled in public schools nor a registered private school. We can't track this exactly because Illinois is one of only a few states who doesn't require parents to enroll or register their students who are being homeschooled with the state. And historically, that number has hovered around 1%, and that's the same thing nationally. We've seen that number increase again to about 3 to 6%, a trend that started in the pandemic and has stabilized about 3 to 6%. Next slide. Earlier, we talked a little bit about funding. Importantly, again, through the state's investment in the evidence-based funding formula, there are fewer severely underfunded districts each year since the inception of EBF. So again, the state has invested about $2.4 billion in the evidence-based funding formula. This means that the number of districts are at less than 70%. So those significantly underfunded ones have dropped from 431 districts to 49 districts. That was in fiscal year 25. That's increased slightly due to a lot of technical weird things. But lastly, the percent of students in districts below 70% of adequacy has declined. Again, we spoke about that earlier, but we've seen that decline for almost all student groups as well. So some really significant progress in what students have access to through their districts. Next slide. But we have a lot of work to do. When we started EBF, we saw some significant gaps in what students had access to through their districts. And those are the per pupil adequacy gaps. You can see, again, Black and Latinx students, low-income students had higher adequacy gaps. Those gaps are closing. So we have seen significant progress in closing those adequacy gaps. And then on the next slide, you can see that's also the case for rural and urban as well as English learners. So those gaps are starting to close, but we still have real progress that needs to be made to make sure that every student has what they need in their districts. Next slide. EBS has also made a real progress in student to teacher ratios. You can see tier 1, which is that dark blue line, which is our most significantly underfunded districts. Those have actually dropped. Again, you can see those gaps closing. We saw really high student to teacher ratios, districts not being able to invest in those increased amount of educators, seeing those ratios really dropping and those gaps closing over time. Next slide. We also saw that for when we looked at districts by the students of color and students from low-income households. Again, we're seeing those gaps closing and what students have access to. On the right here, you can see that FTE for teachers, full-time employment, has increased about 6% since 2016, while our enrollment has been dropping as well. Importantly, though, although the state has made progress in diversifying educator pipeline programs, that has not necessarily translated to the classroom. Educators of color make up only 18% of the workforce, while students of color make up 54%. So we still have a tremendous amount of work to do in diversifying our workforce. Next slide. I will going to skip over this very quickly because Jessica just did a deep dive in there. Again, chronic absenteeism is a powerful predictor. We saw that increase for all student groups, and on the next slide. And also, as I was highlighting before, we think these things are obviously interrelated. We see chronic absenteeism rising. We're also seeing mental health trends are worrisome. 26% of students reported that their mental health was most of the time or always not good. And the percentage of students feeling sad or hopeless increased from 27% to 38% in 2023. So some really significant increases for students in their mental health. Next slide. Thankfully, to growing EBF funds, districts are able to hire more student support personnel. That's nurses, school psychologists, school social workers, etc. However, only school psychologists meet the student to SSP ratio. That's only one of those metrics that are meeting those recommended ratios. And we also know that only 13% of students in our schools have access to sufficient counselors. So again, we have a higher increase of mental health trends, but only 13% of students have adequate counseling at their schools. And racial gaps in access to social workers have actually widened since 2019. Next slide. Talking about the 5 essentials, what we do know about the 5 essentials is that the research says that if a school has 3 of the 5 is showing strong or strongest on 3 of the 5 essentials, they're likely to show academic growth, all the post-secondary outcomes we want to see. And what we saw was that the percent of schools with those strong or strongest implementation decreased across each of the essentials, and you can see that there on the left. And it also decreased the number of schools in the 3 essentials, dropped from 29% of schools in strong or strongest to 20%. So a lot to dig into around what the culture and climate at schools and how that's translating for students. Next slide. Student discipline, we saw here, again, a significant drop, but significant equity gaps increasing. And then that's a great question, Erin. I think that it would be around mental telehealth appointments. I think that would be a little bit hard for us to be able to track, but I think definitely important as we're thinking about access to student support personnel and how districts create those strong collaborations to make sure their students are supported. Okay, I'm going to quickly get us to move us through the outcomes data on the next slide. So again, as I was talking about earlier, roughly a third of students are demonstrating proficiency in math, and this is according to the NAEP proficiency scores. Illinois' proficiency and national rankings have remained remarkably stable, but rates are concerningly low. So our proficiency rate is staying at about 30%. But what's important to note about this is Illinois students weathered the pandemic better than most states. And how we can say that, or why we're pointing to that, is if you look, for instance, at grade 4 reading, we were 28th in the nation in 2019. In 2022, we're 17th in the nation. We made a significant jump. Our proficiency rate did not increase during that time, but other states saw more significant drops. Same case over here for 8th grade reading. So again, Illinois has struggled to increase its proficiency rates. So has the rest of the nation, and Illinois, fortunately, weathered the pandemic a bit better than the rest of the nation. Next slide. Importantly, though, inequitable learning outcomes persist in Illinois. You can see the gap to statewide proficiency rates in 8th grade. Again, those are closing. You can see, for instance, if you look at English learners, the gap in 2011 was 31 percentage point gaps. Now that's down to 27.8. Again, seeing closing gaps. But one trend that we saw nationally and a trend that we're seeing in Illinois is that our students who are in the highest 90th percentile or highest percentiles since the pandemic are growing. They're rebounding from some of that learning loss. Our students in the lowest 10th percentile have seen continual decreases. So highlighting some areas that the state needs to be really thinking about focusing and prioritizing. Next slide. One important note, Illinois continues to outperform other states in growth, but our growth is still recovering from the pandemic. So between 3rd and 8th grade, we'd expect to see about 5 years of growth. Illinois has historically outpaced that, again, a little bit above 5 years of growth during that time. That dropped during the pandemic to less than 5. That happened nationally. And importantly, we are starting to rebound. We're getting back to that 5 years of growth. And another important information is we're 2nd and 3rd in the country, and we're still not getting 5 years of growth. So what that means for our peers in other states is, again, they might not be getting to that full 5 years of growth during that 3 to 5 year period because Illinois is still ranking very high, even though we're not at that 5 years of growth post-pandemic. Next slide. Other key indicators of success have shown positive progress in recent years. Equity gaps are closing with 9th grade on track and graduation rates. Again, we're seeing significant increases for 9th grade on track and graduation rates. We have a highlight here on English learners. We've seen this incredible increase in English learner graduation rates from 2008 to now, 77%. Really important progress there. And then in the next few slides, I am going to highlight a couple of the things I think that you all track and you guys talk about regularly. So more students than ever are taking college level courses in high school, and passing rates are higher. So again, you can see the percentage of 10th through 12th grade AP exams passed. That's increased to 67% in 2024. and the percentage of students taking different advanced courses. So increases in AP, dual credit, enriched in honors. That was a business rule change at ISB, so a little bit different there. And then some IB programs staying pretty stable there. And then looking at college and career readiness endorsements, we've seen both the number of districts increasing and the number of students earning those endorsements have nearly doubled in the past year. Again, up from 30 to 94 districts having access to that endorsement, excuse me. Next slide. As we noticed earlier, however, fewer students are meeting SAT, college, and career readiness benchmarks. I know we've gone back and forth on the SAT and the ACT, so we're going to highlight the SAT here for now. Again, we see still some significant gaps in college readiness according to the SAT, and that drop here on the right from 38% to 30%. Importantly, more students are attaining a biliteracy award. We're seeing significant increases in students that are having commendation awards as well as the full seal of biliteracy. So really strong progress there. And then we've seen the percent of high school students participating in CTE programs that stayed relatively stable since 2016, but it is up back to those pre-pandemic levels, which is a great sign of students re-enrolling in those courses. Higher education, on the next slide, you can see a visual of how the state has decreased its post-secondary enrollment. Again, it's dropping 28% over the past 15 years, but our institutions are more diverse. So they're more socioeconomically diverse as well as racially. You can see, for instance, Latinx students made up 12% of the population in 2008. That's increased to 24% in 2023. So really strong progress in diversifying our post-secondary institutions. Next slide. Unfortunately, again, though, our institutions are just very expensive. And if you look at us compared to the other states, we are about $3,000 more, or sorry, about $4,000 more for tuition and fees and $3,000 more for cost of attendance. Again, that's largely due to the state's disinvestment in our post-secondary institutions, with institutions having to increase those tuition and fees to pay for costs. And what that means for students is the median amount of post-secondary debt that's also risen since 2010. You can see that increase from $4,800 to $7,600. Luckily, through investments in our state financial aid programs, again, the MAP Monetary Award Program has increased 77% from 2019 to 2025. The average reward increasing from $3,600 to $5,700. And that means our net prices are significantly lower than tuition and fees. So what students and families actually pay is much lower than those tuition and fee costs, but there's still huge barriers. If you take a look at the median Black household, again, 19% of their income being asked to pay for public post-secondary institution in the state, still a significant barrier for students. Next slide. Importantly, after significant decreases, the percentage of students taking remedial courses since 2022 has, there were significant decreases in students accessing or having to take remedial courses in college, again, dropping from around 39% to a high of 45% to 27% in 2022. But we have seen some slight increases since 2022. So that's an area that we're going to want to keep an eye on, again, as we're trying to get those rates lower and, what our students are ready for when they enter post-secondary institution. Next slide. Increased supports and increased retention. So on the left here, we found that Illinois institutions are spending more on academic and student supports. So that's academic tutoring, student wellness, wraparound services. And what we're seeing is that retention rates have improved from 2010 to 2023. That increased for full-time students from 71 to 76%. So really strong year-to-year retention rates for our post-secondary students. But we see some significant gaps with part-time students, Black students, and Latinx students, significantly less likely to be retained year over year than their peers. Next slide. Graduation rates continue to inch up with, unfortunately, some pretty significant equity gaps. We saw an increase from 62 to 66%. But again, you can see the highlights of those equity gaps. Importantly here, Illinois students that transfer from community colleges to our post-secondary institutions for a bachelor's, they achieve and they complete their bachelor's at the highest rate in the country. So again, once we get our students from a community college to a post-secondary institution, they complete at the highest rate in the country. However, the number of students transferring has actually dropped 32% in the last decade. Something to think about around our transfer process and who we might be missing out on getting them access to that bachelor's degree. And then last slide, the state has made meaningful progress in overall attainment and closing equity gaps. We've seen Latinx and Black attainment increase about 9 percentage points, with the overall increasing as well. Importantly, as we're thinking about our 60 by 25 goals that the state had grounded on, we're about 49% of individuals having a post-secondary degree, with an additional 8% having that high quality credential. So getting us really close and showing really strong progress to those overall state attainment points or attainment goals. I talked very fast, so hopefully that was able to follow, and I can start to answer a few of the questions in the chat, Madeline, if there's still time.
Yeah, we can take a couple of minutes for questions if anyone wants to come on audio or drop a question in the chat.
Aaron, I see your question about percentage of public schools that offer associate's bachelor's degree while in high school. That's a great question. I don't know if I have that data. I know I don't have that data. I don't know if ISB has that data of the number of high schools that offer an early college.
Yeah, I think because it'll vary so widely in the state. I mean, I know that we have Josh Stafford on the line. I know that there's always a robust group of students getting an associate's coming out of Vienna every year, but I think that that's not necessarily something that we have one statewide number on.
Mhm.
Melina, to your question, all of the materials and the recording will be on our website after the call.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
Melina, I see your question around the changes at the federal level. It's something we're tracking very, very closely. Again, as there's changes to who has access to Pell, there's now work, again, as Emily was mentioning earlier, the work-based Pell opportunity, but some things that we need to think about when potentially students engaging in that workforce Pell and what that could do for associates or bachelors, access to Pell. So a lot of things to consider, as well as graduate courses. So we're watching it. I think it just doubles down on our reasons. Like, the state needs to continue to invest in the monetary award program. We know where that money goes. We know how impactful it is for students. So there's only so much we can change at the federal level, but what we can do is continue to invest in our statewide program, which is very effective, and it is means-based and goes to students who needs it most. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, Erin had a question.
Hi. Yes, I was curious, if you could go back several slides, there was a slide that was a bar graph, and it had like 2020 through 2025, and 2024 and 2025 showed a significant increase in students participating in dual credit classes, and the bars were all blue or different shades of blue.
Yeah, 39, a couple more slides there.
Um, I was curious if you had information on why 2024 and 2025 the numbers increased so drastically for enriched honors.
I believe that was a business rule
I think
change.
that was a definitional
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
Okay, I was like, that's
Yeah.
what program did we implement and why are we
Yeah.
not supporting it more? It's a policy change. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, business rule change.
And then I just wanted to say a kudos for something that maybe I don't know how well it was thought through, but massively helpful. I'm actually from a different state, and I've been living here for 5 years. And I work in workforce development and pathway program policy. That was a huge part of what I did. So this is super fascinating. But I always thought that Illinois, actually, the price tag for going to four-year education was not that severe. And then for whatever reason, it didn't occur in my head that, hello, the cost of living in Illinois is lower than the cost of living in the state I was in. So yeah, compared to the state I was in, it does look like the cost of going to a four-year university is less, but it's not in comparison to cost of living. So I love that you have data showing it in comparison to the cost of living, because that's so much more impactful than just comparing it to every other state ranking. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And see some questions around like associates versus post-secondary. Where we could, we disaggregated in our data tables, and we just pulled out some of the most pertinent or most interesting findings in here. But the data tables in the back of the report have a lot more information. Not to the what Tidra was asking about, again, like access in high school. Wish we had that data, but And then honors classes is truly honors classes. That's a great question. I think again, as the business rules are changing and shifting there, and what's like a co-honors versus, there's a lot of different ways that schools are structuring that. So definitely hard to parse out there.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. This was really wonderful, and we're excited to continue diving in on the resources, and we'll make sure to share the links to the report as well as the recording, obviously, and all the materials from this meeting on our site after the meeting today, because I know folks are going to want to dive in.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Kelsey, especially fitting a lot of important information into a short window. We appreciate you. All
Yes,
right, so
indeed.
now we'll pivot to just some quick updates on state policy and federal policy. So I'll pass it to my colleague Emily to talk through some state updates.
Thanks, Madeline. So, as has been mentioned a couple of times on the line here, ISB has proposed a new accountability system. This follows the changes in proficiency cut scores that we talked about in September. Generally, the kind of core changes are around what the core indicators are, the framework itself. They've really simplified the framework itself in terms of shifting to a smaller number of not compound measures in the way that our accountability system was originally under ESSA. There have been they've removed some of those compound measures. They've changed the labels on the performance levels. They've added some nuance to those summative labels. There's shifts such as, we've been talking a lot about chronic absenteeism today. There's a shift to framing it around attendance versus chronic absenteeism. There's an emphasis on subgroup performance and emphasis on growth for student groups. So, there's a lot of different changes in there. I'll drop the link in the chat in just a second here for just where you can find all that information. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. With all of these massive changes, there is a public comment period happening. ISB just announced last night in their ISB weekly message that they've extended that to January 7th of next year. Originally, it was going to be through this weekend, and that was, for some folks, feeling like a very tight timeline. So there are two ways to submit your public comment. There is a survey that we'll share out again as well. And you can also submit written comments and questions to ISB through their ESSA email address. So basically from here, what's going to happen is ISB is planning on publishing a statewide modeling data set in a couple of days here. From January through March, after finishing taking the public comment for the new accountability system, they will be drafting the new state ESSA plan, putting that out for public comment, doing some iterations of that, hosting some virtual feedback sessions. We'll share all of this, as we get more detailed information early in 2026. And then in April, the goal is to have the board approve and submit to the U.S. Department of Education, because as was emphasized in the ISB email yesterday, if they push that timeline much further back, that puts our state sort of running afoul of the expected timelines from the Department of Education. So over the summer, they expect to receive approval from the Department of Education on the new ESSA plan, which will include this new accountability system. And then in October, all of that will be included in the report card release. So if you have questions about that, I know there's a number of folks on the line who have been really deep in the weeds in reviewing the proposed system, providing feedback, listening to folks. Feel free to connect in the chat there. The other update we wanted to provide, last time we talked about the initial work to implement the Dual Credit Quality Act amendment that was passed in the most recent legislative session. And just wanted to flag there's ongoing interagency collaboration on the subject. The Dual Credit Committee has met another time since we last met. ICCB is still working on a website to include all of this information, and ICCB has communicated that they anticipate publishing the rules for this Dual Credit Quality Act amendment in January 2026 for review and public comment. And as a reminder, what will be included in those rules is a lot of stuff around the initial partnership development processes under the Dual Credit Quality Act, as well as what the sort of appeals processes will be for secondary districts who don't agree with a decision by a local community college partner. There will be rules around teacher credentialing that relate to the kind of updated conditions in this. So there's a lot to come. We will definitely be digesting that and sharing it out for folks come January once that's out, but wanted to make sure folks were aware that that's the expected timeline. Then next up, we've got just a handful of quick takes on the report card, and I'm going to actually kind of zoom through this a little bit because Kelsey talked about a lot of these topics already because they've embedded some of these data in the state we're in. And Neil, thanks. We'll look forward to seeing you at the conference. I'll drop conference information in the chat in a little bit. But, as Kelsey talked about, we're excited to see that post-pandemic recovery is continuing, in particular in ninth grade on track, improvements in chronic absenteeism, as well as high school graduation reaching some high water marks this year. We've got some really great growth in those key college and career readiness strategies, but really one of the areas that we are paying close attention to is these post-secondary transitions, right? Enrollment declines, remediation rates changing and in some cases going up, and slowing of improvement elsewhere. And we'll share more about a data dive we'll do in January. But we're excited to have more data to look into. We'll go into these data and more. So go ahead and advance to the next slide. Again, ninth grade on track, improving, continuing to improve across all groups, and we're seeing some narrowing of gaps, which is really exciting to see. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, four-year graduation rates really significantly improving year over year, which is really wonderful to see. And I think that might be it for our visuals. And again, because Kelsey just went in super great depth on data, I'm not going to exhaust you on that front. As everyone knows, things change very fast. So many people were saying change is the name of the game for 2025 here, and the federal government really emphasized that. Federal government actions have really emphasized a lot of those changes. So, there's been a lot of chaos at the Department of Education. There's been shifting from the U.S. Department of Education through intergovernmental agreements to other departments within the federal government, notably things like moving career and technical education over to the Department of Labor. There's been some reclassification of careers to remove certain careers from the professional category. One thing that we're thinking about is how that can and maybe should impact conversations around pathways work when we're thinking about uh, family sustaining wages and how we're targeting occupations and considering the full cost of pursuing certain degrees in order to access certain occupations. And so that's something that I feel like is some of the nuance that we were starting to get into at the end of Kelsey's conversation here, right? So recognizing that we need to think about what it takes to get into some of these occupations and what it takes to get into these occupations and the cost therein and how long it might take to earn a family sustaining wage. And yes, Aaron, I got you in just a second here. Workforce Pell, as Madeline noted, is coming down the pipeline very soon here. We know that the state is considering how to grapple with this. There's a lot of rulemaking that's about to happen around it. But there's a lot of core considerations that are being discussed right now amongst national policy and advocacy organizations, as well as statewide policy and advocacy organizations and practitioners and institutions about how do we grapple with the different timelines? How do we make sure we're not cannibalizing Pell funds just for workforce funding and at the expense of other programs that are leading to economic mobility for those who are participating in them. So more to come there. We're doing some digesting around workforce Pell and anticipate having incorporating that as a core topic for some of our future conversations next year. I just dropped the link in the chat for the Federal Education Response Group that Advance has been hosting. The next meeting is next week, next Thursday on the 11th. So please do join, and that is going to dive in on Workforce Pell as well.
All right, thank you, Emily. Just want to showcase some emerging resources and policy that is also coming down the pike in this new year. So first, we have an exciting report from my colleague Ben Boer, who's on the call, our Senior Director of Data here at Ed Systems, just released this report detailing the design process, evaluation, and overall findings from a new academic progress indicator developed in partnership with Chicago Public Schools. And so, in line with what Kelsey was sharing and kind of the complex, multifaceted elements that go into a school experience for a student that Jessica highlighted as well. This API really aims to shift the focus away from those standardized test scores to more holistic understandings of school conditions, resources that impact a student's experience at that school to determine how Chicago Public Schools are evaluating and keeping schools accountable on a more holistic measure. And so definitely check out that report. Emily will drop it in the chat and learn more about that fascinating work. Thank you, Ben. And then another, topic that was top of mind for folks are these new and improved evolution of the advanced CTE career clusters framework. So you'll notice in the graphic, this modernized framework includes those cross-cutting clusters. So advancing to the modern world of work, how we think about the skills that students can adapt from one career path to another. For example, maybe business administration, that would fall into many different fields or industries from tourism all the way to hospitality or sports management. There are lots of cross-cutting skills and interests that can kind of overlie and how we can kind of operationalize that using this new career cluster is the work that ISB is really leading in this year to design how Illinois will implement this new career cluster framework and make sure that it is responsive to local realities and needs for communities across Illinois. So if you are eager to discuss these new career clusters or want to engage on this topic, please email me, mgreen@niu.edu. We can get you tapped in and would love to chat more about this framework as we see implementation develop in the state in the next year. And then finally, we do have some upcoming exciting workshops to offer. So as part of those, pathways and smooth transitions from secondary to post-secondary education, transitional instruction is a major part of that suite of supports and policy reforms within the PWR Act, both transitional English and transitional math. And so if you are from a community college or someone, your feeder community college who may be interested in this topic, we would love to have you in just a couple of weeks here. December 15th and 17th, we'll be hosting colleges that have either, if you are implementing math, at least one established partnership. We'll be looking at data, outcomes, those cross-collaborative conversations to ensure that you have strong partnerships with high schools, team time, action planning, all that good stuff. And for English as well, open to those who would like to introduce their first transitional English partnership. So would love to engage with you here. We have a Google form to indicate your interest, and then we'll reach back out with some kind of pre-call pieces that we would love to align on and make sure that we're coming in with the right information and that we can make the best use of our time on Monday the 15th and Wednesday the 17th for math and English respectively. Love to see you there. And then as was mentioned earlier in the chat, we are super pumped for our Success Network conference in person in Palos Hills at Moraine Valley. We're excited to meet with you all and connect on these topics and so many more in breakout sessions. That'll be February 26th, 2026. And so early bird registration is still open through December 31st or the first 150 registrants. So get to that link and register. We'd love to see you there. And maybe I know some folks are also on the call that are presenting. So really excited to have that space to come together and share learnings and advancements and kind of continue to troubleshoot some of the challenges that we face as a state. All right. So we do also, as we mentioned, have an upcoming deep dive. So in January on the 22nd, we will have a deeper dive into some of the report card data and other data sources to talk about college and career readiness, secondary, post-secondary transitions. So we'd love to see you there. Registration link in the chat for that January conversation. And then stay tuned for our next policy committee quarterly meeting, likely after the conference in March. We'll let you all know when that date is coming out. But in our last bit of time, I would love to hear from you all, your perspective on today's call. So please just answer the short few question survey that just popped up in your Zoom. We have, some time left on the call. So if you want to stick around and ask any questions or share any comments from what we heard today, would love to hear from you. But again, thank you again for our presenters from Stand and from Advance Illinois, Jessica and Kelsey. We really appreciate your wealth of knowledge and expertise that you shared with us this morning. And thank you to all who attended. It's great to see you. Great to hear your fascinating questions from your perspectives and vantage points in your work. And hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday and stay warm.